Staying optimistic in these days might be challenging, to say the least. So, of course, you might think, well, maybe we just are not very optimistic. Maybe it's just not our nature. Maybe it's just not our culture. Or maybe there is no reason to be optimistic. So I'm very happy to have an expert here today on optimism. Hello and welcome from France, Michel Poulaert.
Hi, Niels. Nice to hear you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much for taking the time, and I'm getting straight into the topic. We always perceive France as a very optimistic nation because we think of like red wine, champagne, living the life, sitting there, just enjoying you. And when we look into the numbers, Statista, which is a very serious website about data coming from Germany, France is the least optimistic country by far, by the way, by far, even 1/3 nearly behind Germany, the most pessimistic country worldwide nearly. So where do you think does this attitude come from that people are so negative about everything?
Well, it's historical. In our history, people they have a bad attitude with the elite, and it's never enough. It's never good enough. It's never beautiful enough, and it's really it's a real problem with this. It's a kind of attitude that French people have, and mostly in Paris. Paris is even worse, So if you go outside Paris, you can have some more optimistic people, and it is true. We have a nice country. We have a good industry. We have good engineers. We have good food. We have good beaches, and everything is good in France. Well, and people still, negative about it. So it's in our history, and people, I guess it's difficult for French people to see the positive way of life, and they see always the grass is always greener by the neighbor. So it's a question of attitude, and in our history. So I'm happy with that because it's my business. So
yeah, of course. And I saw you speak in London, which is a very tough audience, especially when you don't come from the UK. And I remember that you in London got a standing ovation, which hardly ever happens because Brits are not naturally the audience to easily give away a standing ovation. So my question is now, when we go on an international level, and I saw you speak internationally a couple of times in the US and in the UK, et cetera, some people simply say, I am not pessimistic. I just like to see room for optimization. So I always point out the negative only to become better. Do you think that's a valid point, or is it just a cheap excuse to be the negative person in the room?
It depends how you see it and how you feel it. Wherever we are, we never choose what happens to us. But we can always choose what we are going to do with what happened with us. And so that is an international way to see it. Wherever you live, you never choose what happens to you. And we have the ability to choose what we are doing with it. And optimism, the scientists call that optimism bias. It's a kind of illusion created by our brain, and it is a tendency to overestimate good events in our life and underestimate bad events. It's a way of living. So I believe, and scientists believe too, that we have the life that we choose.
So when someone maybe now tell you, okay, maybe for some people this optimism works, but let's face it, I am just not that kind of optimistic person. I grew up a way that everything was a bit challenging. So I am just naturally pessimistic and I can't change that. This is just how I am. Is that true, or is it just an excuse not to change?
Both. It's both. We know since a year or 10 years, 12 years ago, we know by science, by DNA research, that we all have the optimistic DNA in us, the DNA 5-HTT. And they call that the happiness DNA. So we have all of us the ability to be optimistic, but our culture, the way how we grow and the way where we grow make us more optimistic or less optimistic. So the pessimism is like the optimism, a way how we see a realistic fact. You have reality, but we all judge the reality. Our brain is constantly making, like Instagram, you have filters, and
Yes.
our brain use those filters to interpret the reality and our environment. So we have the hand on it. We can do with that. So if we refuse to go to action, it's an excuse. I guess it's important to understand what is optimism. The most of people doesn't understand optimism.
So what is it?
Well, optimism is the way to see. Optimism comes from the Latin word optimus, and optimus, is better. It means better.
Yeah.
So only better. So you can decide to see things better, but it's not enough. A lot of people think that optimism is the way how we see life with a positive way, but it's not enough. We have to see it as a positive way, but it must lead to action. Optimism must be an energy that leads to an action. Without this action, well, we don't need optimism. It is stupidity, you know?
Yeah. So what happens now? Let's say someone is listening to this podcast right now and thinks, great, we really should have a different attitude in our organization. But at the moment, our senior leaders, board level, people who are on the highest level of the organization, they tell us, oh, everything is so bad and it damages the economy and you should be happy to have work. So the negativity comes from the very highest level. How should people deal with pessimism when it's delivered to them from the highest level of the hierarchical pyramid?
Well, sometimes we cannot act with that. So I don't have the hand on it. So while the world stands still, the action is the only cure against a crisis, for example. So when I can do nothing, the only thing I can do is, what do I have as energy, as resources? Where can I have a power to change something, to transform something? And sometimes if we have leaders that decide for us, of course it's difficult, but maybe it's a way to accept it, a way to find an energy that leads you to an action. What kind of action can you do when you cannot do any action? It's a choice. It's a choice. It's a strange example, but if we see the example of the World War II and all the Jews in the concentration camp, well, some Jews had a way to see the days better than others. So we can leave the same situation, both of us, and we can see the brighter way or the darker way. So it's a choice. So what we have in our hands is the way how we will see the difficulty.
So when we talk about the business world again, do you think that sometimes it is inevitable that people, for example, have to change jobs because they need to get away from the negativity and the pessimism of one organization, and maybe they can thrive and become better when they have to change jobs to a more optimistic organization? Do you think that this is necessary for some people right now?
It's a difficult question.
It is a tough decision. We all know, because especially at the moment, many people are happy to have a job right now. So telling them you need to change, they will say, that's a higher risk to go.
We always need to have a context. What is the context of this person? So yes, of course, if you think that you do anything you could, maybe you have to change. Maybe it's a choice you have to make, but the context is always complex. Did you ask the good questions? Do you have the good answer? Well, and like you said, in time of crisis, maybe it's better to keep it than going away.
I like that differentiation because, especially we met at American conferences, and there are certain American motivational speakers who always give very easy answers to very complex solutions. And they simply say, oh, be optimistic about everything and the life will become better. it is safe to say that being only optimistic with no context, that will not help, right?
I'm absolutely agree. So it makes me sick when I hear that. It makes me sick, and that's why we don't understand optimism. Optimism is not only saying tomorrow will be better. It's a way to act. It's a way to think. It's a way to live. And sometimes you cannot act, and sometimes you have to suffer. So you have to accept that we have to suffer. So and maybe tomorrow will be not so good and so bright. So we have to accept it. But optimism is a bias that leads you to an idea that if not tomorrow, the day after maybe will be better. But we are responsible of our feelings, decision, and actions. So I guess it's important, really, really important to make the difference between I don't know how we say that in English. In French, we say that l'optimisme bias. It's the stupid way to be optimistic only by thinking that if I believe that tomorrow will be better, it will be better. No, it's stupid.
Yeah, absolutely. So when some people now sit here, listen to this podcast and think, okay, I need to be more optimistic, and they openly admit, maybe I am quite pessimistic right now. So first, I like your very scientific approach, because that shows that you don't only talk about optimism, you also did research and you understand how important expertise is. To round this interview up, what are Michel Poulaert's top 3 tips for this year? How can people become more optimistic when they would naturally say they're not? Your top 3 tips right now.
Well, first of all, it's important to know that we have the power to create our own realities. So how you will use this power to your advantage. First of all, we will need to look for the asset and the benefits, whatever happens. So what is the benefit of a crisis? Maybe is it innovation? Maybe is creating new idea? Maybe is meeting new people? I don't know. But you have to ask you the good question. What are the assets and the benefits you can take of this situation? Second, I guess, is to be more flexible. More than ever, we need to be more flexible today than yesterday. Well, for instance, I am a speaker and I need a stage to speak. I need people. Yeah. So for me, for example, be flexible is investing in time of crisis. I'm still investing in new material, and I make a TV studio in my own garage. I put the car outside, and I took my garage and I bought some cameras, some screens, and I made a setup. And actually today I'm still giving keynotes, in streaming, for instance, but I'm still working because I was flexible. So be more flexible. The day of yesterday is gone. We cannot change it. So how can I live in the day of today? And how can I be a part of tomorrow? Well, flexibility is really important. And I guess if I have to choose a third one, is to be grateful. I know it's maybe difficult or easy for some people who listen to us, but being grateful is an important way to use our brain and create a positive emotions. And we need positive emotions. Our brain cannot react with 2 different ways of emotion. I cannot be angry and happy on the same time. So if you need to change your way of life, well, begin with gratitude. Look for 3 or 4 or 5 things to say thank you today. Why? I can say thank you, Niels, for this podcast, for example. I can say thank you for the sunshine. I can say thank you because I heard someone, I met someone, I did something. So be grateful. Gratitude is a powerful way to be optimistic.
Absolutely. And also there is strong scientific evidence for what you just said. Dr. Keltner, who's the leading psychology professor at Berkeley University, together with Emiliana Simon Thomas, who is the leading scientist at the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley University. They had own courses about gratitude diary, be grateful, etc. So this is not just yada yada and motivation.
No. It's real. It's real. It's
strong scientific evidence behind that.
Yeah.
Great. So these are amazing tips. Of course, I'm going to put your contact data in the show notes of this podcast so people can get in touch with you directly. And of course, what I highly recommend, they should book you as a speaker. I have seen you many, many times in different countries, different contexts. Always great. And there is a reason why Le Monde, which is the most well-known international French newspaper, highly appreciates you and praises you. So at the end of this interview, there's only one thing for me left to say. Michel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you.